it's both a pleasure and a curse because going through Todd's history is like I thought I was looking at 3 or 4 different people. I guess the best way to describe him is as a creative. I get, and Todd, you'll correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, but he started out in his younger days as an animator in Hollywood, which
That's the wrong Todd.
aha, the one. So I was looking at 2 or 3 different people.
I wish I was an
Okay.
animator in Hollywood, or I would not be here.
Okay. Good. That's good to know. All right. So maybe I should start with because what I have seen is we know you're working with the Day Tripper. You're on that crew
Yep.
where you're a photographer and then second role videographer, and you're the field producer. So you have a lot of responsibilities there that are more than just photographer. And are you the painter as well?
Nope.
Gosh, are you? So that's okay. So
Because so I get tagged all the time as this guy you're talking about, but there's also a recovering drug addict street preacher who's also named Todd White that I get tagged as
well,
frequently
that was going to
as
be
well.
my next one. No,
He's got
kidding about that.
dreadlocks, and so anyway.
Well, I guess I really should have asked Josh for a little bit more information. So rather than butcher this anymore, perhaps I'll let you, give us the details of your history and how you got to where you are.
Sure. Sounds good. Hey everyone, thanks so much for coming out and looking forward to doing this. Josh asked me about a month or so ago, and I cleared my schedule. I actually had something else tonight, and I wiped it off my schedule, which was nice. So looking forward to it. So my name's Todd White, and I am a videographer and a photographer. And the main thing that Josh asked me to talk about was just my whole hybrid approach to what I do. And so just a little bit about myself. I've been shooting since the 80s. I grew up shooting on film and 35 millimeter and medium format, and also those fun little Kodak 110 cameras. You remember those tiny little negatives? Started shooting on those cameras, and then got lost in the corporate world and spent about 26 years with Cisco Systems and USAA and doing mergers and acquisitions and blah blah blah. I always kept my camera next to me and shooting and creating. Spent about a month in India on assignment for Cisco and fell in love with photography all over again, and quickly looked at how I could exit the corporate world to jump into this full time. So about 12 years ago, Cisco was doing a massive layoff, and I called my boss and I said, "Can I be a part of that? I'll take a severance and options and walk out the door and chase photography full time." And here I am. So I dove all of me into doing photography. So I have shot with a number of different people. I've worked with a lot of different country artists early on, and shot with Carrie Underwood for People Magazine, worked with Luke Bryan and Eli Young Band and guys like that, and have also then worked with different fashion designers that came off of Project Runway, done a lot of fashion photography. And I'd say about 7 years ago, I hooked up with Chet and was doing a photo shoot with him for a magazine and tossed my name in the hat to go with him on the road, and started doing that about 7 seasons ago, and went from just photographer to videographer with him and also producer. I do all the drone footage for the show now, and have now had two Emmys under my belt for the work on that. And really just, I love creating. I love shooting. That's my big thing. And about a year and a half ago, Lumix reached out to me and asked me if I would come on as a global ambassador for them with the launch of the S series cameras. And so I've partnered up with Lumix and Shoot Lumix. And then I've got a few other brands that have jumped on board with sponsoring me as well with the work that I do for Lumix. So it's been a fun journey. It's been a lot of different things. And I will say, as I've grown through my career, I've really settled on working with fashion and commercial work is where my heart is, and that's where my passion is. I often joke around with Chet and tell him that I shoot pretty girls during the week, and I deal with him on the other times of the week that I have to go on the road with him. So, so So tonight specifically, Josh asked me to talk about hybrid approach to what I do and being a hybrid shooter. And he said he polled the group, and that's what came back as one of the main topics that y'all wanted to learn about. But in the midst of all of this, I want to open this up for you guys also to ask questions. And it doesn't have to be about the hybrid approach. If you want me to do a little bit of a side trail and go deep into some video, we can definitely dive into that. Whatever you guys want, and I would love for y'all to really just keep the questions flowing. I can sit here and ramble, but that's not fun. So as we go through this in the past with speakers, how have y'all usually handled asking questions? What's the usual method for doing that?
I'd say we just ask whenever we have a question.
Okay, that's cool. Just cut in and go for it.
Speaker's option. Tell us what you want, Todd.
Y'all, however y'all do it. If you just want to cut in, go for it. Just cut me off and dive in there, and we can jump in for sure. So let me start off just with one of my main approach and how I do my photography. A lot of my clients hire me and they bring me on because they want both photos and they want video as the end result. And that usually starts off with me having a meeting with them, trying to figure out the marketing needs, what they're after, and how they plan to use the content that I create. So for example, recently I've been doing a lot of work with Nolan Ryan's Beef Company. And so we've wanted to be going out and shooting content for the ambassador program for all the different barbecue restaurants around the state. And so they wanted both photo assets and then they want video content as well. And so we've been piecing and working all of that together throughout traveling through the different restaurants and stuff with the ambassadors. And like an example, another client of mine was Sam Villa, who is an international hair company that has like blow dryers and products and whatever. And so I spent 4 days in the studio with them filming a series of 8 step-by-step videos, as well as a sizzle reel for marketing and a whole bunch of photos for their step-by-steps and for blog releases and things like that. So more and more I'm finding my clients are coming and they're wanting both. I rarely have a client say, I want to hire you just for photos. It usually is a video lead with photos as an add-on is what usually happens. So with that, then, and a lot of my work also is very rarely in the studio, but a lot of it is outdoors, run and gun style shooting and creating. So for me, I've really, really focused on working myself to a camera setup that is lightweight and easy to move around with. A lot of times when I'm shooting, I'm out in the city and I don't have time to set up sticks and gimbals and all that stuff. It really is very run and gun. And sometimes we're shooting in locations that are a little bit iffy and eventually we get kicked out. So we make the best of it. And I don't want to have a bunch of crap that I have to drag with me on the way out. So I really have narrowed down my kit. In fact, this will probably surprise a lot of photographers, but I do not shoot with a 70-200. I do not own a 70-200. I know that is one of the Trinity lenses, and I have tried that lens before, and it's just too big, too much, too cumbersome, and too much of a hassle. I think the last time I shot with that was when I was in India, which is probably 15 years ago, and sold it as soon as I got back from that trip because it was just a pain to lug around. So let me just kind of start off and talk about the camera that I use and some of the key things for me about the camera. Are there any questions though before I dive any further along? Anyone? I'll take silence as no. Okay.
I have a quick question.
Can we take
Yeah.
Todd full screen?
So the question was, what kind of hours do professional photographers keep? Do you think of yourself as a 40-hour week, or is it just from week to week? You never know. And of course, the skill is probably getting contracts to know what your future is going to be about.
It is, exactly. I don't have a set schedule. It is definitely not 40 hours a week for sure. I often tell people that when I left the corporate world, I work longer hours, harder, and in more diverse situations than I did for my 26 years in the corporate world. And I will tell you though, I love it. The diversity of what I get to do is really what drives me and keeps me moving forward. And you're right about the different clients. Just the contracts I get, the clients that I have really change up what I do and what my week looks like from week to week. And like right now, I'm in the middle of 4 or 5 different client discussions trying to figure out what's going to end up happening for me for the month of October. I already know I'm on the road speaking in Dallas at iHeart Photography Conference for Lumix. I already know I'm going to be in Atlanta filming. I already know I'm going to be working on a Garrison Brothers whiskey distillery documentary in the month of October. And I may be in Oklahoma filming for some behind the scenes BTS for another feature film. So it's just kind of all over the place. And I just got back from Vegas 3 weeks ago filming for Wynn Hotels and Resorts with a client there as well. So it's just all over the place. And I have no clue what November looks like, but it'll probably fall into place and on we go. So it definitely is diverse.
Todd, there's a question in the chat window
I
from
saw that.
Vance.
Mhm.
Oh, you have seen it?
Yes, totally did that. So I'm going to run through my gear setup that keeps me mobile, and lighting will be one of those things that I'm going to touch on as well. And I'm going to kind of run through some of the things that keep me nimble as I move through. With the exception of a bigger light, if I bring a bigger light, um, everything that I bring with me and that I use fits into a small camera bag. It's a messenger size bag, and everything I use for most of my shoots fits within that bag. So first of all, for me, I use a Lumix S5. That is my preferred camera. I have the S1R, which is the 47 megapixel. I have the S1, the S1H, but I've settled with really, for the most part, using the S5. Love this camera. It's 24 megapixels. It shoots 4K. It shoots 5.9K. All the fun stuff. I've got 24, 30, and 60. Some people might be like, well, wait, it doesn't do 120. Well, it does 120, but it processes it in camera, which is not the best quality of video you're going to get. So, but I don't even care about 120 really. For me, when I'm out there shooting, 60 frames a second is as fast as I need to go for my slow motion. And so that's where I settle with that. I don't even settle. That's just what I use. I don't need 120 frames a second. So 24 megapixels for this camera, which handles the majority of what I need for the clients that I'm working with, for fashion, for portraits, for whatever it might be, headshots. It takes care of what I need. If I'm shooting jewelry or something like that, like I did today, which was a rare day, I spent like 4 hours in the studio with a client shooting jewelry. I'll shoot that on the 47 megapixel camera because I know I want to crop and zoom, and they want to play with that a little bit for detail like diamonds and things like that. But this is the camera of choice. Also, you can see I've got a cage on it. I use a small rig cage system. So for me, when I'm going to switch back and forth for heavy video or heavy photo, I can accessorize this as I need to put accessories on. Now, as far as lenses, when I'm out in the field, I have narrowed my lenses down a lot, and I've been through all the gamut of lenses that anyone could ever imagine having. But for me, there are 3 main lenses that sit within my kit at all times. There's a 24 to 72.8, which I think is the workhorse lens that every photographer needs to own. I shoot with a 35 1.4, and I have the new 50 1.8 that Lumix came out with. A little set of prime lenses that they have that are all 1.8. I don't need a 1.2, don't need a 1.4. A 50-1.8 works perfectly. I'd even be happy with a 2.8 personally. But this is one of the other lenses I have. So those are the 3 main lenses that sit in my bag. Every so often I may pull out an 85 if I feel like it, but that's kind of a rare moment when that happens. But that's my lens setup of choice that I like. The only other one thing I'm probably going to add into my kit that we just announced from Lumix is the 24 1.8, which is the same size as the 50 that I was showing you. And that'll go in my kit as well, just for some wider options for some of the shots that I might need. But those are the lenses that I have. That's it. That's what I defer to. Outside of my lenses, the next really key thing that I have in my kit that I think everybody needs to have, and I'm about to do a YouTube video on this as well. This variable ND filter is, for me, the #1 accessory that anyone that is getting into video needs to purchase after their camera and their lens. This is the number one accessory that you need. Are we all kind of familiar with the 180 rule and that when it comes to video? Do most people know what that is? Okay. So I see some saying no and some yes. Let me just hit that on the side note real quick. When you're shooting video and you are shooting like in 24 frames a second or 30 frames a second or 60 frames a second, in order to get normal, natural motion blur that makes sense, that's what our eyes is used to seeing, we have to double the shutter, double the frame rate to get the proper shutter speed. So if you're shooting at 24 frames a second, then you need to be at 1/50th, because we don't do 1/48th unless you have a cinema camera. You'll do 1/50th for your shutter. If you're shooting at 30, it's going to be 1/60th, and at 60, it'll be the 1/25th. But if you think about that, being outside on a Texas day, if I'm shooting at ISO 100, I'm shooting at 2.8 or even f4, and I have to have my shutter at a 50th because I'm shooting in 24 frames, my shot is going to be way overexposed. So the only way to compensate for that is to use an ND filter. And so I choose to use variable ND filters, and they are not all created equal. And what I always recommend to people to do is to buy them in a set, and you'll want to buy where they're different darknesses for different ranges. So I have one of these that is like an ND4 to like a 32, and then this one picks up at 64 and goes to like 256, I think. So two different variations depending upon the lighting situation that I'm in. And you can even tell by looking at it, this one's darker because this is the darker version. So that is the number one accessory I think anyone needs to have. So I will use the variable ND filters. That is key. I rarely ever use them for photography. Mainly I use them purely for video just so I can get the proper exposure. Let me see some of the questions here. Would you recommend to someone that shoots photography only to explore videography to expand and improve photography skills? As in, do the skills complement each other? Okay. Oh, and then brand from Gary. I'm assuming you mean the brand of the ND filters that I'm using. And so the brand of the ND filters that I'm using are the Moment ND filters. Those have been working great for me. The other one that I recommend, and they carry at Precision Camera, which is the Prime HGX series. It's the HGX Primes. They're one of the newer ones of that series that they came out with. Both of those work really well. Probably will get shot for saying this, but I think that the Peter McKinnon series that everybody's all fancy about online is definitely way too expensive and overkill. There's nothing special about them. They're just another set of ND filters with his name on them. So I said it, there it is. And I've tested quite a few of them, and I have found that some of them, there's two things when you buy an ND filter to really pay attention to. Number one is that basically you're taking two pieces of glass and you're moving them across each other to make it lighter or darker. And if it's a cheap ND filter, when you get to the extremes of you fully open or fully closed, you'll start to see the hash pattern, and the little waffle lines will show up around the edges. You'll also get weird vignetting that will occur at the extremes. And the other thing to pay attention to is that you will get a color cast. Some of the ones that you can buy online, you'll get this weird color cast. It usually will lend itself towards like a purple color cast, kind of like you dropped an Instagram filter on your images. So be careful when you buy them and test them out and make sure that all three of those points are clear. Vignetting, the hash lining on the edges, and the color casting. Those are three things to watch out for. As far as sports shoot photography only to explore videography, videography is a whole different ballgame. And I do recommend, with the way that things are going and with getting commercial business, I do recommend that every photographer really needs to pursue or at least have an understanding and start dabbling in videography. If you just look across the board with social media and things like that, everything is moving itself towards video. And so I think that needs to be something that you have in your toolkit that you can offer your clients. Even if you're not doing massive big productions, but just small social media clips will go a long way with your client whenever you're working with them. So I really do think that you need to do that. I think the skills do complement each other. One of the biggest things that you'll have to overcome when you're doing videography versus photography is going to be your edit time, because it takes a while to edit video itself. Even if I'm going to go just to do a quick 30-second video for a client, I can spend a couple of hours on that because I'm picking the right clips, choosing the right music, I'm color grading. It's just all the transitions and everything that goes with it. It's a lot of work that goes into it. And you've got to have the processing power as well. That's one thing to keep in mind if you're working on the video, especially if you're doing drone work. It's a big drain on the computer whenever you start editing that footage. So what's good for photography as far as computers, you'll definitely need to beef that up whenever you're starting into video editing. I personally use Adobe Premiere Pro. I've got the Adobe Suite, and it just is a natural thing for me to use that. I've dabbled in Final Cut. I don't like Final Cut. Final Cut doesn't make sense to me. It just doesn't flow the right way whenever I'm sitting down to edit. And then DaVinci Resolve, that whole setup there, too steep of a learning curve. I've got too much work to sit back and have to take a time off to go learn a whole new program. So I'm going to go with what I'm familiar with. And the user community and the plugins and some of the LUTs and the things like that you can use for doing color editing and transitions and effects and all, it's just a more of a robust community out there for like Premiere or even Final Cut than there is for the DaVinci Resolve series. Okay, so we talked about the camera. We talked about the lenses that I use for myself. The next thing I'm going to mention to you guys is going to be on stabilization and how do I get a stable shot. Now, I mentioned about not using a gimbal. Now, I've got a gimbal. I've got the Ronin RS2 that I have and that I'll use sometimes depending upon the situation. But for the most part, there are two things that I have that I use for stabilization. I forgot to get them out of my bag. Give me 1 second. The two things that I use when I'm doing stabilization right off the bat for video is I've got one of these little nifty wooden handles that will clip onto the side of my cage, and that will allow me to stabilize that much better. And most of what I shoot is handheld, and so I can use that to offer some good stabilization when I'm doing my shots. And then if I also want to get something a little bit lower and get like a walking trailing shot, then I've got the handle that fits on the top of my small rig, and now I can carry the camera a little bit lower and get like a nice sweeping shot as well. So those are the two main things that I use. And the third thing that I have is I also use one of these. Now, this is made by a company called PGY Tech, and this is called the Mantis Pod. It's a relatively new thing that they came out with. Prior to this, I used the Joby Gorilla Pods is what I used a lot of. And I would use that for holding on. I would have this attached to the bottom of the camera. And so whenever I'm shooting and I also want to get to be engaged with my person that I'm filming, then I often will shoot with my eye up to the viewfinder, and I'm using this as another way of stabilizing my shot as well. So between that and the handles, then I've got some options for stabilization. Now, some people look at it funny because they're like, "Gosh, you're hand-holding everything, and you know you are. How do you get a stable shot with doing that?" Well, keep in mind the more points of contact to the body when you're shooting video, the more stable your footage is going to be. And so for me, I always maintain for most of what I do 3 points of contact to the body. I've got my hand here. I've got my hand on my other handle or on the one at the bottom. And then I shoot with my eye up to my EVF. I do not like to shoot with my screen in the back. I don't feel engaged whenever I am doing that. It just doesn't feel right. So I personally don't like to go that route. And that's me. And what I've done is I've set up the back of my camera whenever I'm shooting. I've split my screen. This is a setting inside the camera. And I've split my screen to where my thumb, as I move across the back screen, actually moves my focus point around in my frame. And so I'm able to do rack focus and follow my subject as I need to, changing up the focusing and moving that around by sliding my thumb across. And so that's how I also am able to maintain that focus. And now I know what everybody's going to say. I'm shooting on a Lumix camera and the autofocus sucks, blah, blah, blah. I know that's the thing that goes around. And you're right. It is not the best autofocus in the world. However, with the full frame cameras and some of the recent improvements, and with the S5 series, this autofocus is really, really nice. It does rival the Sony A7 III series on the autofocusing systems with it. And so I have found that I love the focusing system with my Lumix. But let's also be real, when you're shooting video, chances are you're probably doing a majority of that using manual focus. And a lot of what I'll be doing is manual focus when I'm shooting video, especially if I'm doing a corporate talking head type video. I will set my aperture roughly at about a 5.6 to an 8 to give that person some flex room when they move. And then I don't even worry about trying to mess with autofocus in that scenario. I lock it in, set it, flip it to manual, and let it ride. And I've never had an issue or a client come back with issues on focus. All right, let me see what I'm missing here. We've got lenses, we've got camera. We talked about the variable ND filters. I've talked about stabilization to some effect with that. One of the cool things I will mention that I do like that's changed a little bit with like the Ronin RS2 with our cameras is that we have tapped into using the little LCD screen in the back of the Ronin. We've actually tapped into the active track system with that and our cameras. So I can actually now tap the person on the back of my Ronin RS2 little screen. I can tap it to my person and tell it to track them. And the Ronin will actually move and track that person as they're walking across the frame. So that's kind of a fun little gimmicky thing that works pretty well. Berlin Smith's comment there, only Sony guys say that, the rest of us are okay. Thanks for that. I like that. Okay, so let me go back up to a person earlier on was asking me about lighting. So just with the rest of my kit, everything that I take with me is going to be lightweight and easy to transport and move around. Obviously, when I'm shooting, I'm going to be shooting outdoors, most of the stuff that I'm doing, so I rely heavily upon natural light. However, when I need to bring light with me, there's a couple of lights that always sit in my bag. Number one is this. This is made by Nanlite. This is their Lido Light 5C. This is a bicolor LED small panel. It has a little diffusing cup that goes on top of it to make it a little bit softer. And so I've got a full RGB spread plus the bicolor for this particular one. This works really, really well. It's small enough, as you can see, that if I need to drop two of them in my bag, I'll do that. And then the other light that I bring with me is this, which is made by Nanlite. This is a Pavo tube. This is the smaller version. I think this is the 1 foot or the 6 inch. I don't remember. But this is called their Nanlite 6C. And this, once again, RGB, bicolor, the whole thing. And what I love about these is they've got magnets on them, so I can stick them up in different places. So I was doing some street interviews a few months back for Lumix, creating a series, and I needed to be out and about running around the streets of Austin. We're shooting around dusk time. It was nice to be able to set up my interviews whenever I had like a metal railing or something next to me or by like a lamp post or something, because I could just take this light, stick it on there with the magnets, and then light my subject and give plenty of light to be able to do my filming. So these sit with me all the time in my kit whenever I'm out and about shooting. Now, if I need something a little bit bigger, then I use a Nanlite makes a Forza 60. It's a 60 watt setup, and they're relatively small and easy to run around with. They also have a little pistol grip system that you can use those Sony NPF batteries on the little pistol grip, and you're able to take that out and hold it and move it around and use a softbox and stuff on it. So those are the main lighting sources that I use for my quick run and gun. I've got bigger setups that I use when I'm doing a bigger production. But on my run and gun, hybrid, nimble, quick and easy run around, those are the main things that I use when I'm doing that. I believe, did that cover Vance's question for lighting? I think we're good to go. One of the things that I tell people is that when you're going to be getting a light that you're going to take with you in the field, is when you can, you need to get one that's bicolor. You really do. They will cost a little bit more usually, but make the investment because you never know the environment that you're going to be filming in. And it's frustrating when you get into a room and the lighting is mixed lighting and you don't have a way to compensate for that. And then you just have to bite the bullet and deal with it. So when you can, always get the get your bicolor set up for sure. Let's see here. Day Tripper uses a lot of action cam for inside the car and jumping in the water. How does that match with the Lumix? So the action cameras that we use when we're filming on the show, we use the GoPros for all of that. So when you're working with the show itself actually shoots on Sony. They think they use the FX6 is what we did. We just made a big switch on the show. So they use the FX6. We use the GoPros. We use my Air 2S system for the drones. Those are the main cameras that are being used across the board. Is it easy to mix? It's not the easiest, and the guys that do the color correction definitely have to spend some time with that. But there are some tools within Premiere that help out with that. So Premiere's got some new features that have recently been introduced where they actually do shot matching or screen matching and blending with color now. So you can pick a reference screen and then sync other shots across that and get as close to a color match as possible. It's not perfect, definitely can be a challenge. I was working on a project for Best Western recently, and it was profiling Chet on the road since he is a Best Western ambassador. So I shot everything that I needed for my footage on my S5. We also shot some stuff when we were in the water diving on the GoPros, and then I grabbed some footage that the guys had that I needed that they were shot on the FX6, and I blended all those together and made a video out of that you couldn't tell the different cameras as far as color is concerned. So it can be done. Takes a little bit of work though. Takes a little bit of work. I heard some noise. Anybody was jumping in for a question? Nope. All right. Okay. Let me bring up one other point. GoPro, I just mentioned that. It's rare, but I do take a GoPro with me on some of my shoots, mainly to grab like behind the scenes, or if there's something that needs to be done that's a little bit more daring. Like recently when I was shooting with the Nolan Ryan's Beef Company, there were some shots I wanted to get inside one of the smokers of them sliding some meat in. So I put a GoPro on a stick and put that inside there and would risk that more than I would risk one of my cameras or my hand going in there. I was able to use that for the shot. I do like, because the new GoPro, like the 9 and even the 10, have a linear mode, so it comes out to be more like a 4x3 than that weird fisheye. So it's easier to blend as far as the frame look and feel with other footage and doesn't look really that far off. So that's really nice if you can do that. The older GoPros could not do that at all. Another question, so audio, and that happens to be the next thing I'm going to jump into. So for my audio, there are two things that go with me all the time, and then I bring a third along just in case, depending upon the scenario and where I'm filming. So number one is I use a shotgun mic. This is made by Ceramonic. I say a shotgun. This is one of those little top of the camera sort of shotgun mics. It's not a true shotgun. True shotgun has a tighter audio pattern to it. But I use this, which works out great. I do love this with my S5. One of the cool things about this little Mantis pod is that it allows me to stick the microphone on the side of this Mantis pod. So if I'm doing some vlogging style setup and I've got the camera facing back to me, I can have my microphone here, but it also moves. Like I can actually turn this microphone and flip it all the way around. So if I wanted to film forward, I could turn the microphone back to me and shoot the camera this way. And so I've got some cool options as far as the direction for the microphone with this new tool. So that's what I use for the top of the camera. And just answer the question that Gary put out there really quick. When I'm on my own and I'm doing my shooting, even most of my corporate stuff, I run my own audio. I like the one-man band, especially during COVID times. The smaller crew was the way to go. On the show, we take an audio person with us. We've got a guy that runs with us who does work with A&E, Discovery, and all those other channels and stuff. And when he's not working with them, he goes on the road with us. And he's got a big, 4 mic kit, mixer, all kinds of wires and antennas going everywhere, and boom mics and all that fun stuff. But for myself, I'm running that on the camera. The other setup that I use is this from Ceramonic. This is the Blink 500 system. And the main difference of this and the other system that I have on the floor over here is that this is on a 2.4 gigahertz system. So runs with sort of that cell phone type signal bandwidth that it runs on. But this is what it looks like. Super tiny. This is the receiver. That's the transmitter. Super small. This clips very nicely. The receiver will clip onto the top part of the camera. And this is a 2-channel setup. And it's really important when you're looking at audio that is going to be a 2-channel setup is that you need to get it where it splits the A and the B channels. And that's one of the number one things I can tell you when you're buying. If you're going to go with 2 different transmitters to 1 receiver, that you need to get it where it splits the channels out. And what I mean by that is that if I'm interviewing 2 people, some of the older versions of these and some of the original versions of the Rode, what would happen is, yes, you could have 2 microphones on 2 different people, but it would come into the camera on a single channel, which meant that if I was talking, and let's say that it was Bill and I were having a conversation on camera, and if I was talking and I stopped and then Bill was talking and I cleared my throat while Bill was talking, guess what? My clearing my throat would be on this one channel, and there was no way to duck that out. And you would hear that even though Bill was talking. You'd hear me underneath him clearing my throat. So you want to make sure you can split the channels to an A and a B. They'll come in mono. You can convert them to stereo in post-production, but you're able to duck it out. So whenever Bill is talking, you can completely kill my mic in post-production. And then when Bill's done, you bring my mic back up. And it runs on 2 different channels in the editing program. And that is a really big thing you want to look at when you're running a small system like this. So the Blink system for me works really, really well. It is not made for long distances. I'm not going to be able to be in one room and have somebody in a different room. It's not going to pass through the walls. So there are some limitations, but for the majority of what I'm doing, if it's just me talking to camera, something like this is perfectly fine and works really, really well and does a great job with it. The other mic setup that I use is also made by Ceramonic, but this particular system runs off of a UHF system. And so this one will have your receiver and it'll have your transmitter. A little bit bigger, but they're UHF, which means then they're going to have a longer range. They'll be a little bit more reliable when you're moving from like a farther distance or like in 2 different rooms and so on. They also work a little bit better in larger cities where you may gather and get some interference that may come on different bands. These particular types of setups work really, really well for that. And so that's when I know I'm going to be in a really big city or something and I need to have a little bit of extra coverage, then I run off of something like that. So you can run off a UHF system or you can run off a 2.4 gigahertz system. And the price differences on those are fairly significant when you start looking into that. Now the Ceramonic brands are really affordable, so I think you can get into a 2 transmitter, 1 receiver Blink system like I showed you for I think around $350 to $400. And then the other system I showed you, I think those are around $900 to $1,000 for that particular system. So not crazy, but also, just depending upon your budget of what will work with that. All right. As far as for myself, when I am out, so I've covered gear wise. Is there anything else on gear that you guys want me to cover? That's like a basic run through of gear between camera, lenses, ND filters, some basic audio setup, some stabilization, and some lighting. Is there anything else on gear that I'm missing that you guys have a question on or any insight for? What I will also mention really quick too, y'all probably have already heard this or know about this. My other card case is across the room, so never mind. I run off of 2 card cases when I'm shooting, and this is just a foolproof, dummy-proof way for me not to use a card that I haven't backed up. So I run a card case that is all my cards that I can use, and I use the ProMaster cards, the Rugged series. I love the ProMaster Rugged series. It's the UHS2s. It's the ones that are the 260 and 300 megabit for the read-write speeds. A little more expensive, but love the fact that they're fast, especially when I'm recording 4K. But I'll have this card case, which means I can use these cards. My other card case has X's all over it, which basically means these have not been captured. Do not use these. So from the case to the camera, fill it up. From the camera to my X case, which then doesn't get touched. And then after I back those up, then they get moved over back to this case. And I've lost footage before. It is not fun. It is embarrassing. It has cost me money, and it has cost me a trip to go back out to a place to go have to film because I lost footage. Heck, I did that with our show one time. I had to go back out to South Padre Island all by myself to go retrieve and reshoot footage that I had lost. So it's not fun, and that's a heck of a drive. So lesson learned. What do I do for batteries? It seems like you have a lot of different systems. Do I keep a USB battery pack to keep everything charged? So with everything that I have, you'd be surprised. So camera batteries, I always carry 4 of these with me wherever I go as far as the batteries are concerned, and they last for quite a bit. I'm not running out of batteries consistently there. This microphone here is not battery powered, so it basically runs off of the camera, so no impact there. Both of my wireless lav systems for my microphone audio use, both of those have internal lithium batteries that I charge up, and they go for a long time, and I don't have those actually dying on me. I've never had one of those go out during a shoot, so those are built in internally. As far as the lights, both of these have internal lithium batteries as well, so I've got quite a bit of time I can run on these for sure. So I really don't. I have a USB pack that I keep with me. I rarely have to tap into it. Most of what I do isn't going to be hours on hours on hours on hours. So I've been lucky so far. Most everything has internal batteries for me, though. The other question is, what do I use to back up video? I assume some sort of NAS system and the cloud. So for me, I do have a system that I use. It is not a fancy NAS system for me. I buy high quality hard drives, a combination of both SSDs as well as spinning disk drives, and I will use those as my backup system. So when I come in and I'm working on projects, I have 2 SSD drives that are sitting in my computer, and there's 4 drives in my computer, but I have 2 project drives. I have one SSD drive for photos and one SSD drive for video content. And so I work off those respectively. But then when I come in, after I back them up to those particular drives, I also have 2 other drives that I back everything up to. So there's a backup drive and a backup drive. And so I keep everything in 4 places. And when they're all done, then I move them over to G-Tech hard drives and store those into my closet, which they're all indexed and labeled and blah, blah, blah. So don't use anything crazy fancy as far as the NAS system is concerned. We use a Drobo system at the office for the show, and I have heard those guys complain and have issues with that left and right. So my system works fine, and I'm not going to go invest in one of those. So that's my preference on that. I just tell Chet I'm just tired of hearing him bitch about him sometimes, and so anyway. Um, as you can tell, I've been with him for a long time. We have a very interesting relationship. Um, and as far, let me see what else I was going to mention. Oh, as far as the cloud's concerned, I do back up the final version of client videos. I do back those up to the cloud and I keep a copy of them, but not all the supporting files. It's just the final edited version that gets delivered to the client. A copy of that sits in the cloud at all times. All right, cool. And I've got some people telling me about Synology and the WDMI cloud. Yep, I've looked into some of those. It's just a matter for me. Just right now, it's about just time to go buy one and set it up and figure it all out. All right, cool. Let's see. I think those are all the main questions that I had people asking. What am I missing? What else do we need to cover?
How much B-roll do you need to shoot?
When you think you have enough B-roll, you usually need more. And so what I tell people is whenever you're going out and you're shooting a video project and you think you have enough, you need to at least shoot at least another full set of what you have. Always double of what you think you need. Because some of your shots aren't going to work. You might need more of it. You might need a longer stretch of it. But I would say for me, on the average, for each minute of a roll that I'm shooting, the main roll, I'm shooting at least 4 minutes of supporting B-roll is what I typically run off of. And when we're out shooting in the field, we shoot a ton of B-roll. I mean, that's gigabytes upon gigabytes upon gigabytes of B-roll. And we typically overshoot. We definitely do overshoot that for sure. And when I say like the 1:4 ratio, roughly, for me, I'm also factoring in that I shoot a lot of that at 30 or 60 frames per second. So I know I'm going to be able to, I'm stretching that out already. So I factor that in whenever I'm shooting the B-roll. Very rarely does my B-roll ever shot at 24 frames a second. It's usually done in more of a slow motion. That brings up a point I'm going to mention back earlier on when I was talking about the frame rates for video. There's 24, 30, and 60. And I've had a lot of people in my classes ask me about when do I choose to shoot at which one. So when you're shooting video, and you're going to be editing the video, if the audio is important, the audio that you capture, if you plan on using that, spoken word mainly here I'm talking about, if you plan on using that, then you really only have two choices, and that's going to be 24 and 30, because you can only edit in 24 and 30 as far as your timelines are concerned. If you shoot 24, you edit on a 24. If you shoot 30, you edit on a 30 as far as the timelines are concerned. And then your audio and your video will all be synced up and everything is great. A 24 and a 30 timeline, 24 is more cinematic. 30 is a little bit more of like sitcoms. Most of your like CNN TV news are shot in 30 frames a second. So it's a look that you're going after when you decide between 24 and 30. If you plan to edit on a 24 timeline, and you shoot in 30 frames a second, and this is something I tell people to do, you will slow that footage down. It's only an 18% difference, but it's just enough of a slow motion that you're able to take some natural movement and smooth that out when you're filming somebody. Like a walking shot, someone has a natural cadence and that can be a little bit of a rocking. Well, if you want to take that little bit of that rocking and smooth that out a little bit more, then you would use that 30 frames a second to do that. And then 60 frames a second is going to be your true slow motion. That's going to be the slow motion shots that we talk about and we see and that people often use. That'll be 60 frames a second. You'll slow that down on the 24 timeline, and then you've got your slow motion. It won't look slow motion when you're shooting it or when you review on the camera. It only goes to slow motion when you put it into Premiere and you tell it or you interpret it as 24 frames a second. And that's something that people get confused on because they shoot it in 60, look at the back of the camera, and it's not slowed down, and they get confused on that. You can do that in your cameras, but I often encourage people not to shoot the slow motion in the camera, like the SNQ mode on a Sony. Even Lumix has that. Don't shoot it that way in your camera. Don't capture your slow motion. Let the camera do the processing, because you will suffer as far as the bit rate and the quality of that footage is concerned. You usually will drop down from like a 10-bit color profile to an 8-bit color profile. The number of megabits per second as far as data quality will drop from like 150 to from 150 or 100 can drop all the way down into like 10 to 15 megabits. So you lose a lot of quality whenever you do that. So be careful about doing the in-camera processing for your slow motion. Anything else? Other questions, thoughts, comments? What am I missing?
Do you deliver in 4K?
So right now, the majority of the time, I do not deliver in 4K. Most of the clients don't have a need for 4K. Most people's TVs at home, unless they're really big into technology, most people at their houses are still watching on a 1080 TV. Some people have the 4Ks, but then are they willing to pay the extra to get the 4K delivery? Because I know it costs extra to get 4K, like in Netflix and things like that. For the web, for using online, 1080 is enough. You really don't need to be doing 4K. I think like cameras that record 8K and things like that, that's just overkill. It's just one of those things for just the numbers. Kind of like the megapixel race. It's just chasing a number right now. But I always shoot in 4K. Everything I shoot is in 4K. And the reason being are two things. Number one, actually, there's three things. Number one, the quality of a 4K footage squeezed down to a 1080 looks really, really nice and super crisp and clean and clear. Secondly, is I future-proofed it. And so whenever 4K does become the thing, I've got my 4K ready to go and becomes a standard delivery. I've got it. And then secondly is because when I'm taking 4K footage and I'm editing that on a 1080 timeline, now I have 50% more footage than what I need. And so I've got room to play with it. So if I take my 4K and shrink it down to 1080, then all of a sudden I can do fake camera movements by using keyframes on the editing program. I can do a slide. I can do a little bit of a move up and a down. I can do a zoom in and a zoom out because I got 50% of my footage to play with before I start to move into a pixelation issue. So I always shoot in 4K and edit in 1080. It does take more space, but it definitely is well worth it in the long run, and it pays off very well, for sure. Music too. When you're working on videos and you're doing your editing and you want to drop a music bed in there, I highly recommend that you are very careful about the music that you pick so you do not get copyright strikes, both either for the client to have to deal with, or if you go to YouTube or social media, that you don't have to deal with any of the copyright stuff. So YouTube has a free music library that you can pull from and use music from, and that is cleared for use. But if you're going to do this with a client, you're going to be serious about it and providing them a video that they can use on their social media and so on, then you need to invest in one of the sound websites, if you will, the music websites. And there's a few of them that are out there. The most popular ones are Epidemic, Artlist, and Soundstripe. And so for me, I typically use Soundstripe and then I use Artlist as my backup. I don't use Epidemic Sound. I found the process of having to clear music through Epidemic Sound is just a pain in the backside that I do not like to mess with. For example, if I shoot a video, edit it, and pull music from Epidemic Sound and I give it to my client, I have to know all the URLs where my client's going to post that video, and I have to clear that through the Epidemic Sound system. And that's just a pain. I don't want to have to babysit my client to that extent. So Soundstripe and Artlist, I pull it down, it's copyrighted, I've paid for it, and then I give it to my client and it can go and do whatever it needs to do. And I don't have to track it. So that's my preference on that. Clay's got a question about it. Austin had a good reputation for local crews and commercial photographers. How's the reputation and supply of crew today? That's a good question. There are good crews that are out there in Austin these days. You, depending upon the level that you're looking for, you may have to dig some. We have used students out of UT and ACC as far as for like PA work and grip and things like that and gaff. But a lot of what I've noticed when I've pulled people from the universities is there's a whole lot of book knowledge, the classroom knowledge, but not a lot of practical hands-on. And I think that's a great approach for us to pull them and take them on the road and break them in and show them some different ways of doing it, especially because, with our show, we're not rolling in a ton of money to make this show. We have to go raise all of our own sponsorships for the Day Tripper show. So we're making it happen. We're not blowing money just to blow money and bringing a big lecture, bringing tons of crews. We're bootstrapping and bringing people along, and we're teaching. I mean, I learned that way. I'm totally self-taught on all my video and my photography. I did not go to any formal training on any of that whatsoever. So in fact, I cut my teeth shooting video on the show with the Day Tripper. So that it's all self-taught from there. So I think there are good crews that are out there. You just got to dig for it, because let's face it, there's a lot of people with cameras. There's a lot of people with cameras, but as far as people that really know what they're doing and have really focused and really tried to hone their craft, that's a whole different story. And depending upon the project, I don't want to train somebody on a particular project. Like for the Garrison Brothers project that we're doing, I don't want to use that as an opportunity to train someone about how to do lighting. I need someone that knows how to do lighting so we can get there, get it set up, and we can roll. It's not that opportunity. I don't mind teaching somebody on the set of the show how to do lighting when we have a little bit of flex, but not on a bigger project at all. Doesn't work that way. Berlin put up a link here, Smart Sound. Okay, cool. I'll go check that out and see. There's all different options that you have out there to buy and to get music. Just the main point is be careful. Don't just go pull a fancy, new hip, hit song and go out there and use that, because you will end up getting some copyright strikes and some issues. A copyright claim in YouTube isn't the end of the world. It's the copyright strike that becomes the issue. If you use music with permission from a local band and they say you can do that and you have documentation to prove it, there may be a copyright claim against your video. And all that basically means is you can't monetize it, but you can still go forward and use it. And it's not a strike that goes against your account. It's the strikes that become the issue. And that's the challenge, because 3 and you're out on YouTube. So it's a little bit stricter there. And in the commercial world, you definitely don't want to get embarrassed with a client coming back to you asking you why they're getting a copyright strike against them for a video that you gave them. So not cool. Awesome. Trying to think, anything else? Those are the main things I wanted to cover, and just showing kind of from a hybrid approach, unless there's a technique that you guys want me to talk about or anything. But that's my main setup for the hybrid work that I do.
Well, Todd, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Covered a topic that we have not heard much about. And I'm sure some people will be stimulated to try it, and others will be cringing, saying, no way, this is too complicated. But it's really fascinating, and we appreciate your time.
Actually, I've got a question just popped in. How do I flip between stills and video mindset when you're on site? There's 2 things I'm going to tell you that are wonderful. I'm speaking from a Lumix perspective. I don't know how the other cameras will handle this. So there's 2 things I'm going to mention. on our cameras, there is something that we have called a creative combined set. And what it basically does for me is I go in and I say all of my settings, white balance, shutter speed, all those settings, I tell them to favor video. And so what that lets me do is on my top dial, when I switch between the video mode or I switch to the manual for stills mode, it takes all of my settings and it treats them independently. So when I'm shooting in manual mode for stills, and let's say I have my shutter set at 160, ISOs at 100, and maybe I'm at a 2.8 aperture, I set that. And then when I flip it to video mode, all of a sudden here, now it has all my video settings, and I'm shooting in vlog usually. So I'm at 640 on the ISO. Maybe it's at 2.8 from my aperture and my shutter is 1/50th. It keeps all that independent. So I can go back and forth between the two and my settings will switch. And I don't have to sit there and reset all my settings every time. It's kind of like a beefed up custom function mode that most of us have on our cameras, C1, 2, and 3. It works kind of like that, but it treats my settings as independent. So for me, that really, really helps when I'm out there shooting and flipping back and forth. As far as the mindset is concerned, to Vance's question, it's for me, it's something that I developed over time. And so for me, when I'm shooting stills, I always shoot my stills first and do my video second because my stills allow me to capture like my main shots with the clothing, but it also lets me see how the model moves, how the clothing moves, um, or what I'm working with in my environment if I'm shooting like barbecue or something like that. And while I'm shooting my stills, I'm kind of on autopilot at that point, and I begin to build out my video story in my mind while I'm shooting the stills. And so for me, it's just over time, it's become really easy to flip back and forth on the mindset. And then Clay mentions Josh recommends a creative journal. Do I save time for personal creative work? Absolutely, I save time for personal creative work. I do that a lot. I do that probably, I would say at least once a week, and maybe it's 3 times a month if I skip it. But I usually try to get at least once a week a personal shoot that I have for myself. And that can be as simple as creating a YouTube video, or it could be as simple as me calling up one of my model friends and just saying, I need 2 hours of your time and let's just go create. Let's just throw together a mood board and go make something happen, or go test a new technique or something like that. So at least once a week, I try to do that. In fact, I'm doing 2 of those this weekend just for fun, just me going out and just trying out new things. And then someone asked me here if I'm shooting raw video. I'm not shooting raw video, so I'm shooting in vlog, which is in essence like shooting raw pictures, but it looks even worse, if you will. So when you're shooting video on a camera, I recommend for new videographers, just shoot in standard. Just shoot in standard and roll with it. Minor color correction. I'm more concerned about technique and settings than teaching somebody how to color grade. That's a whole different ballgame. But for me to take full advantage of the dynamic range of the cameras that I use, I do shoot vlog video, which basically is very flatlined. It looks almost gray whenever you're shooting it. Now, word to the wise and a caution, if you're with a client and they're on set and they're watching what you're shooting, shoot in vlog if you want to, but there are settings in your camera that whatever is displayed on the back will actually be color corrected to baseline color. Don't ever let a client see you shoot in vlog. They won't understand, and you don't want to have to go through a discussion about color grading with your client. So I was recently doing some work for a restaurant group downtown. We were doing some cooking videos, and the client wanted to have their own monitor that they could look at what I was shooting to be able to look at the shots and make sure we were getting what we needed. So I use a Hollyland wireless transmitter system for my camera, to transmit HDMI over to a 7-inch monitor that I have. But I was very clear in my camera settings to tell that monitor to display what we call a Rec 709, or like a broadcast color corrected version, because I didn't want to freak out the client when I'm shooting in Vlog. And if all that went over someone's head, then I apologize. What are opportunities for using C-roll for stills or stock sales? Clay, what do you mean by C-roll for stills? I get the stock sales as in like using footage on like one of those stock sites to be able to sell the footage. Is that what you're saying? But as far as this, okay.
Yeah, that's I just want you're on a job with a client, and I didn't know the arrangement that you had for the things they don't want. And so I was thinking, well, it's not exactly B-roll, but it's maybe leftover, or you're shooting some things while the set is down.
If I go into a shoot and I know the content that I'm shooting might be something that I want to use elsewhere, then I will put that in my contract and I will ask. There are quite a few things that I shoot though that are a little more proprietary that I couldn't use or really wouldn't have a need to use. Like when I was in Vegas, we were shooting content for Wynn Resorts, and it was all around sports betting and the new betting app that they're launching. And I have no need for any of that stuff in my B-roll. And it wouldn't make sense to give it to anybody else because it's very specific on its context. But I do build it into my contract when I think I want to use something, like the restaurant groups that I shot recently. I spent 3 days filming with them, and I built that in my contract with the marketing director that I could take any of that footage and repurpose that for my own use, because I knew that my sponsors like Lumix, Nanlite, and other places would want to be able to use that footage for promotional, and I could use it for my reels as well.
Are they going to give you new cameras that aren't out yet to try and use to give them comments, feedback?
You mean like the GH5 Mark II that I have here?
Yeah.
And other cameras that show up. Yes, in fact, before the S1R, which was the first of the S series, was announced, I had that camera 9 months before it was released. The S5, I had this camera 8 months before it was released to create all the launch content for this. And there are other things coming down the pipe that definitely I have my hands on.
Are you ever tempted by new cell phone cameras, iPhone or whatever?
Nah, no. I've used them. I've incorporated them in for sure. I mean that they have their place. They have their use. Especially, I was doing a travel documentary a few years back for. This is going to sound strange. Just hear me out. I was hired by the Chive, who has a Chive Charities division, not the Chive that you see with all the girls and whatever, but there's a whole charity division that works closely with veterans in the U.S. services. And they sponsored them to go down to Cabo San Lucas on a big fishing expedition. And so Chive Charities hired me to go on that trip to film and document those guys on that fishing trip. And I couldn't exactly pull out a big camera in the airport for filming, so I used my iPhone in 4K, and I used an app called Filmic Pro, which basically unlocks the video features. And so I used that and documented the trip to Cabo with the iPhone to incorporate in the final product that I gave them.
Cool.
Todd, one thing that was asked or alluded to was the use of stills. And Ken Burns has made a career out of using stills.
Yes, he has. He has.
Black and white.
Yes. And I think most of that was because there wasn't video at the time of the things that he's mainly been focusing on. I don't really do a lot of stills. Most of the time, when I'm doing my hybrid run and gun stuff, you bet, stills and video all day long. But like the shoot that I did with the restaurant groups in Austin, we were doing so much video content that and I was having to focus on shooting B-roll, and we had basically a series of recipes that we were making, and we had like one or two chances for each one. So it didn't make sense for me to try to do both when I'm filming B-roll of all the stuff happening. So we hired on another photographer to come in and was next to me shooting stills while we were filming the B-roll side of it.
Yeah,
So
and some of the stuff I've been working with, I have more stills than I have video to go with it. So I'm going back and using stills.
And that's a great use of it too. Absolutely, for sure. That's a great use. Let me hold on one second. My laptop battery is about to die because I forgot to turn my power surge on. Hold on. There we go. All right, sorry about that. Okay. Somebody asked here, do I have any upcoming video classes? Yes, Lindsay, there are classes that are at Precision Camera. I don't remember what dates they're coming up on, but I know I do have some classes that are planned that I'll be teaching. I teach a video 101 class, which goes into frame rates and exposure triangles and camera choices and lighting and all of that. Then I teach a video 201, which would get outside, and it's more of that run and gun, hybrid lifestyle, fashion video type stuff that I create and the content I do. I teach that class. And then I also have a video editing class where we get into Premiere and start talking about editing. And we actually go through and we build out an edit of a video as well in the class. Once again, check the Precision Camera calendar because I'm lucky enough I can keep track of what happens tomorrow. So. All right, cool.
Todd, I wanted to ask, your website has art and painting on it and not photographs. Am I getting the wrong website?
Yeah, if you go to, so my website is toddwhitestudios.com. The toddwhite.com is that other dude that's the painter guy.
I'm sorry, we referenced that in the PR.
No,
I'm not sure how we did that.
It's funny.
Toddwhitestudio.com is your, do you have any other, can you put in the chat or any other Instagram or other Twitters that you want us to know about?
Let's see, toddwhitestudios.com. And my Instagram is just simple. It's just @ToddWhite. Those are the main areas, really, I think, to focus on. There might be one more thing I can bring up. Let me see. Let me go find it real quick. Depending on how lazy I get, this is another site that has a lot of my fashion type stuff on there as well. But those are the main ones. But did I just do a direct message to? Oh, I just did that to Evelyn. Goddammit. Sorry, Evelyn. I just blasted you. She had done a direct to me, and I forgot to do the everyone switch back. There we go. Okay. Here's that one. And then my Instagram. Here's that one. And then the other site, just to throw in there for fun, would be that one. Yeah, I'm not sure about the other guy. I'm just knowing, I think he lives in the UK, maybe. I don't remember. Just get tagged as him.
Well, maybe next time you can talk to us about your painting and your.
I'll go work on that really quick. That's funny. Yeah, no, that's not gonna happen. This is my second career. That's enough for me. I'm done. I'm gonna ride off in the sunset on this one. That's it.
Well, we want to again thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. It's been quite a trip.
Cool. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right.
Cool.
Todd, thank you, sir. Do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Terrific.
Thanks.
All right. Any closing comments from the board?
Are we going to have a competition that includes video?
As soon as we get a new competition director. We'll see about that.
Is Gary still online? Anything we want to know about the deadlines or anything about he sent us an email about the club contest. Is there anything new?
I don't think Gary's still here, but I'll speak to that. Since the website is set up to receive your entries. So go to the website, get the current information on submitting for Interclub. And I think it's under the second tab on our website. And all the instructions are there, but it's basically just like submitting for any competition. And there's a whole bunch of different competitions that you can enter all of them if you want. And that includes, we have a print competition too. So for all of you who do printing or just have good images that you wouldn't mind seeing in print, get them ready for us, and we'll include them in the process. So we really want to get as many submissions as we can to get a good representation, because remember, each member can only submit one image per category. And that gives, we need at least 6 images per category. Well, 6 images per category to submit. So that gives a lot of opportunities for people to participate. So if you just have one category that you think you have anything worthwhile, send it for that one category. Or send them for all the categories. You never know what the judges are going to think about what your best shot is.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions about that? Well, with all these faces I see here, I know every one of you has images that are good enough to submit. So don't be shy. Otherwise, I have to come after you. You don't want that.
Well, thank you, Mark, for being such a great meeting MC tonight. And
well, I may be a comedian. I don't know about the MC.
And Todd was a great suggestion for a speaker. We have to thank Josh for that, for getting that. That's great. I hope to try and follow up with a precision camera class sometime.
Okay.
His classes are really good.
Mm-hmm. They are.
All right, guys, we'll see everybody again on October 7th.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you, Ed.
Good night.
No,
Bye, y'all.
Well, good night.
no hackers tonight.
Yay.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.